Sundered Fate has arrived. The first expansion for the second edition of Warcry is here, giving us more scenery and 2 new warbands for Warhammer Age of Sigmar's fast-paced skirmish game. Once again, we're entering the Gnarlwood, on the western coast of Fondia, in the Ghurish heartlands, in the beastie realm of beasts, in the midst of the world of the Age of Sigmar, pulled together from the fizzy remnants of the Warhammer world that was. Warbands from every realm are slowly being drawn towards this belligerent little forest, which holds the MacGuffin to end all MacGuffins, the crashed Seraphon void ship, crammed to the rafters with magical artifacts and treasures, which at the very least can reshape reality itself. Sundered Fate pitches the stealthy reptilian chameleon skinks, known as the Hunters of Huanchi, against the stone-faced, chisel-wielding Jade Obelisk, who are not entirely willingly aligned to the chaos god Tzeentch, the god of manipulation and change. In this video, I'll be lifting the lid on the Sundered Fate box, sifting through the content, and helping you to decide, is this the box for you? And if your curiosity's brought you this far, the answer to that question might very well be yes. Yes, I really like this box. And to help you out even more, I'm going to be looking at this box from 3 distinct perspectives. If you're someone who's purchased the preceding box, the Heart of Ghur, if you're someone that's played the first edition of Warcry but have yet to dip your toe into this new edition, and thirdly, what value this box might have to somebody who's absolutely brand new to Warcry. Hello, let's go check it out. So hello, I'm David, this is Hobby Jackal, this video is sponsored by Charlie Ghur's Skink Emporium. Let's go take a proper look at the Sundered Fate box. So to give you an idea of size, here's how it compares to some other Warcry content. It's a shallower box than the chunky Heart of Ghur, or the original Warcry core set, but otherwise matches the same dimensions. For those new to the Warcry scene, here's how it compares to some popular board games. And if you're not into board games and don't know what the hell I just stacked up there, here's how it compares to some common household items. Long onion, marmalade orb, parrot bowl, DIY paste. So, what's in the box?
What's in the box?
So first up, as with most Games Workshop boxes, you're met with piles and piles of grey plastic, enough to choke a medium-sized dolphin. They're intimidating, but also exciting in equal measure. So first up in this particular box, we've got the scenery. So as with the scenery in the Heart of Ghur box set that preceded this one, this box is populated with gnarloaks. As with everything in the Gnarlwood, they're predatory, but when they're old enough, slow enough, or simply dead enough, they make exceptional bases for cool tree houses. So of the first 2 sprues we see, only one of them is new, with 3 of the 5 sprues contained in this box being the same as those from the Heart of Ghur box set. However, for those of you who are considering owning both and getting lots of duplication, only the single sprue containing the scatter terrain and bridges is built the same as the Heart of Ghur, as one of the 2 new sprues creates upgrades to 2 of the gnarloaks featured in the original set. Now I was quite impressed with this because it changes the way they look. So here's a regular Heart of Ghur gnarloak, and here is the Sundered Fate version built from the same sprue. So apologies for how grey they are, but as you can see, it's changing the silhouette and the footprint and making an additional sort of area to play across. The other sprue that we looked at first creates a brand new piece for this set named the Hollow Refuge, which admittedly is not a gnarloak at all, but looks like a hollowed out gigantic vertebra, which itself is filled with bones. This box is clearly intended as an expansion, especially from the scenery standpoint. And for gaming purposes, this box alone creates a rather sparse battleground, but I'll look at how this can be remedied in a number of ways later in this video. Finally, for storage purposes, these gnarloaks will absolutely, definitely not be fitting back into your Sundered Fate box. So next we're on to the Warbands, and these are some absolutely fantastic blimmin' models. And if my totally scientific poll is anything to go by, these are 2 of the most popular warbands for 2nd edition so far. And I'm sure that poll wasn't influenced at all by these being the newest 2 warbands revealed. So first up we have the Jade Obelisk. They're hardy cultists who are tearing down any non-Jade related effigy at the behest of their creepy tentacled bird persons. Their tribe's unfortunate and desperate pact with these creatures has resulted in their bodies slowly and painfully cracking and solidifying unless they do exactly as the critters say. Said critters, known as Idolarchs, are representatives of a malevolent Tzeentchian demonic entity known as the Speaker in the Stone, who's currently trapped within a carved Jade Obelisk. The Speaker grows in power through bloody sacrifice and the raising of further Jade monuments, and is frankly pissed off that anything or anyone would dare worship anything other than it. All of this is represented wonderfully across the miniatures, as the Nethrite priestesses which lead them are armed and ready for some alfresco sacrificial heart surgery, An obelisk bearer carries around a shard of the Speaker in the Stone's original obelisk, granting the Warband additional powers, and everybody else is ready to chisel, smash and deface anything which looks remotely not green and Tzeentchy. In the other corner we have the Hunters of Huanchi. In contrast, these are stealthy little Seraphon, guardians and wardens of what remains of the previously mentioned void ship, known to them as the Eye of Chotek. It was once a city-sized temple which crashed down from the heavens eons ago, potentially as the result of some Tzeentch-related mischief. Their little stalk pack guards the treasures within from falling into the wrong hands and potentially spelling doom for the realms as we know them. Their creation itself was set in motion as the void ship was already plummeting towards the realms, with these primal skinks birthed amid fire and screams and developing a bit of a religious obsession with the slan responsible for their creation. Motzalpoter, as he was known, perished in the crash, but his surviving acolytes recovered what remained of the corpse, encasing and entombing it in a great gold statue, at which the Hunters of Huanchi lay the broken weapons and bones of any intruders they meet. These stealthy little fellas are armed with dart pipes and moonstone clubs as they clamber and crawl their way across their scenic bases. They're fantastic miniatures, oozing with characters, and they're also accompanied by 3 terror wings, handy and swift companions who specialise in nabbing faraway objectives, or simply getting all up in your opponent's grill in an instant. And I'm going to throw this in here, if you like the cut of my jib, please do feel free to smash down on that like and subscribe button, just like a member of the Jade Obelisk smacking down on a big golden frog statue. And if you want me to continue doing stupid stuff like this, you can also support the channel by buying something from Firestorm Games, including Warcry Sundered Fate, and you get like 20% off and I get a bit of money as an affiliate link. Cheers! Anyway, on with the show. So next we have this card, Insert, protecting the papery goods from the dastardly chisels of the Jade Obelisk. It features some cool artwork so you can frame it and mount it in your bathroom as a discussion point for you and your family or something, or whatever you like. Here we have the bases for your miniatures, always convenient if you want your fighters to stand upright. Next we have the cards. You're getting 32 cards to help you swiftly set up Warcry games using this set. That's 6 terrain cards for the content from this box, 6 terrain cards which combine these contents with the Heart of Ghur box set, 6 victory conditions, 6 deployment cards and 6 twist cards. You'll also have 3 divider cards which can be used to denote wounds where you have multiple fighters of the same type. All the cards have the same backing and design as the Heart of Ghur, allowing them to be shuffled together seamlessly. And the symbols across the backs are the same as the original Warcry set should you wish to include them, although there's a distinct branding change so you'll know which edition's popping up. Just to forewarn, there seems to have been a slight miscommunication between the design team and the rules team, or some kind of team at some point, because the scatter terrain and rope bridges included in the set haven't been included in the cards which just feature the content from the Sundered Fate box, suggesting perhaps at some point in the process these weren't going to be included, and giving those battlegrounds an even more barren look than they'd have otherwise. As a quick fix, if you're just playing with this set, you and your opponent could alternate placing down 3 items from the scatter terrain box and a couple of bridges each, just to give your battles a bit more pizzazz. So next we have the fighter cards for both warbands. These will look familiar to Warcry players old and new, and for those less familiar, the cards provide a quick reference for everything your fighter needs to move, fight, live and die on the battlefield. You'll also see these gnarly symbols called rune marks. The top left simply denotes that the fighters are members of a specific warband, with those slightly more to the right denoting which abilities they can use, or are occasionally linked to a rule in the Warcry core book. There are 7 different fighter types for each warband, and there's an amazing amount of versatility in these 2 kits, allowing you to build your warband in a number of ways. And I'll go into that in a bit more detail when we have a look at the build instructions. So speaking of rune marks and abilities, next we have the ability cards and books. Ability cards are double-sided and help you identify which of your fighters are which. They also provide you with 6 abilities and a reaction, with each of these being unique to your warband. The reaction mechanic is new to the 2nd edition, and it allows a fighter to use an activation out of the usual turn sequence, often in response to something happening such as an enemy moving within a certain range or them being attacked, essentially in reaction to something happening. As mentioned previously, if your fighter has the right rune marks, they can use the ability or reaction listed. So they're both really interesting fun warbands, both of which play exactly as you'd hope given the narrative behind them. The chameleon skinks are fast-moving, tricksy and hard to pin down, but ultimately fairly squishy. With 13 of them scampering out of the box, you'll not only be outmaneuvering most foes that you come across, but you'll be outnumbering them. The Jade Obelisk, in contrast, are tough as jade boots, pack a punch, are slower but have some interesting tricks up their sleeves, particularly if they're able to get their priestess, obelisk bearer and idolarch into key positions. They land in at an average number for Warcry warbands with 10 fighters in their warband out of the box. So next we have the build instructions, allowing you to turn that pile of grey plastic into a much more interesting pile of grey models. I've already touched upon the neat design choices of the souped up gnarloaks, but I thought it was worth touching on just how very versatile both of these warbands are. 7 of the 10 skinks have the option to choose between a melee weapon or a dart pipe, including switching your Huanchi's claw or hornblower into a regular wee skink, which would be useful if you picked up a couple of boxes and wanted variety, if not necessarily useful from a strategic perspective where you're probably going to be yelling, "Gimme the Huanchi's claws!" rather than making one of those into an alternative model. The Jade Obelisk equally have a great deal of flex, including 4 hand options and 2 face options for your priestess. Now I just love this alternative maskless version, even with the little tiny mask hanging from the belt. There's also an option to arm each of your chunky iconoclasts with war picks or statue smasher hammers, and the option to arm all 4 of your defacers with either bows or stone cutter tools, resulting in some great and unique poses regardless of which ones you choose. Putting me in a bit of a quandary between my 2 consciences, the "oh hey that looks really cool" conscience, and my "oh hey that one's probably going to be balanced and a bit more fun in the game" conscience. I think that makes sense. So next we have the Stealth and Stone Warband Tome. Rocking in at 65 pages, it's the same size and follows the same format as the Rot and Ruin book which preceded it in the Heart of Ghur box set. The first 21 pages give us further background, building on the Gnarlwood narrative and giving us much more insight into the 2 warbands than we ever had for our first edition warbands. We learn more about the sad history of the cultists who became the Jade Obelisk, from the days of their ancestors in the Ghurish cavern city of Voxofskull, as some of the finest stone sculptors in all of the realm, but who were unable to get to the safety of Azir during the Age of Chaos, which was not a good time for mortal beings. We learn more about the background of the Hunters of Huanchi, hear of savage Saurus spawning within the depths of the Eye of Chotek, and the issues facing them now that Anoriel Ventalex made it past their centuries and spread the fame of the wealth and power to be captured within. A few other things to touch on from the narrative side of things. We're getting proper details for the spine crawler webs. The critters here are described as web-spinning arthropods with 1,000 segmented legs that latch onto folks' backs and suck the marrow from their bones. I guess I'd be doing the same if I was hungry and lived in the Gnarlwood, but this does point away from my hopes that we'd be seeing some Gloomspike Git spider riders. There's a number of updates to the Gnarlwood map, including locations linked to the narrative in the box, and the warbands, but weirdly, or rather interestingly, one of them right down here is called the Eskurgan Bone Monasteries. This has no connection to any of the narrative in the book and is not mentioned anywhere else. I'm thinking this hints to a future warband for Bloodhunt or Nightmare Quest, which are the next expansions we can expect to see, with my vote going on Flesh Eater Courts turning up in one of these. And you can hear more about this in my What's Next for Warcry video, which should appear about there, I think. So next up in the book, you're getting gorgeous model photography to inspire your painting sessions, followed by game rules broken down into faction rules, in case you don't have your cards to hand, additional Gnarlwood terrain rules. Now this is repeating rules we'd already seen in the Heart of Ghur, but adding in new rules for the Hollow Refuge, which is unique to the set, and gives a fighter a free defensive reaction once inside. We've got new Forest Tactics rules, which sound like great fun and can be used in any Warcry game, even those based outside the Gnarlwood. They allow each player to secretly pick a strategy from 6 options before revealing it and using it in the following game. Examples include Forage, which allows a fighter to gain an additional random lesser artifact at the risk of taking some damage. Place Traps, which can cause damage to the first fighter to approach a particular terrain piece. Or Lay an Ambush, which can allow a friendly fighter to make a bonus move action. We then have the narrative rules section, granting 3 unique quests to each of the 2 warbands included, alongside specific artifacts of power, heroic traits, lesser artifacts, and an encampment location each. All of these feed into the 2nd edition narrative campaign system and are geared towards the playstyle and background of each warband. Examples include a Jade Obelisk quest to kill an enemy hero in a game, sacrificing them to the Speaker in the Stone, turning their corpse into jade and fashioning that jadey corpse into a particularly potent weapon or armor. The Hunters of Huanchi have plenty of great stuff in their side of things too, including a new encampment location called the Heavenly Pool, which just sounds lovely. The pool contains a fragment of the Eye of Chotek in its depths, cleansing the waters, making them glow pleasantly, and healing those that bathe within it. Next, there are 2 campaign arcs, which are less about the core book narrative rules and more about stringing together multiple games to form an interesting narrative. Therefore, you can use these with some basic tweaks without owning the Warcry core book. The first of these is the War of Stealth and Stone, which pictures 2 players, one playing each of the warbands in this box, against each other across a series of 3 linked games with the results of each determining the next battle fought. The Trail of Fire campaign arc is a great sounding campaign for any mix of warbands with 4 to 6 players split into 2 teams. One's trying to preserve Talaxis, or the Eye of Chotek, and the other is trying to blaze a safe path to the ruins to let everybody and their mates just trundle on up to it and raid it for all the good stuff. Each team has access to different forest tactics, and those are the same ones we mentioned earlier. And each but the final battle are determined by a fun matrix which rolls up a battle plan depending on which of those forest tactics are chosen by each of the teams. The final battle is a large, everybody in punch-up, which looks like great fun. As it's very likely you'll be able to pick this book up separately in future. Again, I've covered this in a previous video. There are copies of the battle plan cards included, excluding the terrain cards, and they do also include the rules for setting up terrain using anything you have to hand, which are useful if you want to use something from your collection and quickly set up a game. The book ends with some background tables for both warbands, including names, origins, and leader backgrounds to help you quickly roll up details for your warband or inspire your narrative choices. So turning back to the box, we are finally near the bottom, with one last thing to look at: a double-sided board to play your games on. Coming in at 22 inches by 30 inches, this is the standard Warcry size. It allows you to get a game up and running on a normal-sized human table, unlike some of the other Games Workshop games. It's double-sided, both sides are an alluring and slightly different shade of brown, both of which match the boards in the Heart of Ghur box set, albeit with different design elements and things, so they're not duplicates. But they do allow you to lay them down next to each other, creating a larger board, so you could play a multi-warband game of Warcry or a small game of Age of Sigmar or 40k. Right, so in my next section I'm going to be having a look at 3 different considerations if you're considering picking up the Sundered Fate box set. Broken down into Heart of Ghur owners, first edition Warcry players, and brand new players. But before that, a quick word from our sponsor.
Hello, Charlie Ghur here, local businessman and skink enthusiast. Are your skinks making too much noise all the time? Are your skinks constantly stomping around, driving you crazy? Think there's no answer? You're so stupid! There is! Chameleon skinks. I couldn't hear a thing! Only available at Charlie Ghur's Skink Emporium, currently located outside the Gnarlwood.
So you picked up the Heart of Ghur box set and you are wondering if Sundered Fate is a good expansion for it. Well, my quick answer to that is, yeah, I really like it. I think it's a good expansion, but let's have a quick look in more detail. So assuming you like the gnarloak aesthetic, the Sundered Fate box set solves the one issue I had with the Heart of Ghur box set, and that was just that the terrain, or certainly the footprints of the terrain, were a little bit sparse when compared to the other launch boxes. And these additional chunky variants of the gnarloaks help settle that, especially along with the line of sight blocking Hollow Refuge. You are getting a third identical scatter terrain sprue, which will have no additional use for you. Although I must admit I've still cleaned up the bridges to use in games because I think they'll be fun, and the rest of the kit will be really useful as basing fodder. Now, a couple of other things to consider: you do only get 6 cards which actually mix the terrain sets up, so you're not getting as much variety as perhaps you usually get with Warcry, but it's great to see these in there. And there's nothing stopping you picking one of the regular Heart of Ghur cards and then each picking something extra from Sundered Fates to really mix up various battlefields. You're also getting a board which can be combined with the Heart of Ghur box set, as mentioned in my first part of the video, allowing you to play 3 to 4 player games or even work towards Age of Sigmar or one of the other larger games. Probably the real deciders for you here are going to be, do you like the 2 new warbands? They're where a lot of the value in this box is contained, particularly as the bulk of the Sundered Fate book contains content relating to them, including their background, rules, and quests. In terms of non-warband content in that book, you're getting 1 new rule for scenery, forest tactics, optional rules, and a 4 to 6 player campaign. It's worth noting that we'll expect to see all of this content released separately alongside the next expansion, which will be named Blood Hunt and released around February 2023. Now, whilst buying the big box does tend to net you some serious discount, that only works if you want everything or are willing to sell some of the bits on. If you're only interested in some of the stuff, you could pick it up then. Now, I personally love both warbands. I love the look of the new terrain. I'm looking forward to trying out the forest tactic rules. So yeah, I'm happy to have picked up Sundered Fate. Right, so on to my next chunk. So this part is aimed at players who have played Warcry during the first edition, possibly have one of those boxes, but haven't yet taken the step into the second edition. Now here's what Sundered Fate can do for you. So the scenery, depending on your taste, is chunky, tall, and looks great on the table. However, to get any decent playability out of this box, you're gonna want some more. Assuming you have one of the original Warcry boxes, you're in a really good position to mix and match to create some really interesting games. Now you're not getting the Warcry core book for 2nd edition in this box, which isn't terrible as the core rules are available for free, as are the updated stats for any existing warbands you have, each of which have been given a brand spanking new reaction mechanic, as well as a full rebalance. Now I've done a full separate video about this, but what you're not getting in the free version of the rules is the rules for narrative play, and that, for the most part, locks you out of making good use of the quest content for the 2 warbands. It's worth noting that these only take up 8 pages of the Stealth and Stone book, and there's nothing stopping you from using this content such as the artifact and the heroic traits in a 1st edition campaign. Additionally, the campaign arcs mentioned earlier in the video occasionally link back to the core book content, but are easy enough to tweak with comparable stuff you'll already have. Assuming you've retained your tokens dice measuring flappies from your first tango with Warcry, you'll also be missing the single scratch tokens that represent a single activation being used through a reaction. These new abilities are, as the name suggests, used in reaction to something happening, at which point you spend an unspent activation to use it. But fear not, you could just use the weight token as it essentially means the same thing for games purposes. The Heart of Ghur did also include tokens to represent hammer, dagger and shield, but we did survive a whole 3 years of Warcry without these, and plenty of folks made their own or simply didn't use any. Right, so that's probably all you need to know about that. So on to my final section, which is for brand new Warcry players. Is this box for you, or does it have any value to you? Also, welcome, Warcry is a great game. Alright, let's take a look. First things first, this box set has been designed as an expansion and hasn't been designed with new players in mind. However, it does still hold some value if you like what's inside and you're willing to get creative. You can access the core rules for Warcry for free online, with a link in the description, and in addition to the 2 warbands you get in the box, if you have any Warhammer Age of Sigmar or Warhammer Fantasy models, you can also find the free stats for those online to mix up your games. Now you will also need some basic gaming tools to get you by, many of these which you may have to hand already. You'll need 6-sided dice, I would say 18 as a minimum for a 2-player game, and ideally a couple of colours, which just helps you keep track of your wild dice. You'll need something to measure in inches with, and a standard tape measure is absolutely fine for this purpose. You'll need tokens or dice to denote wounds. D20 dices or D10s work really well, or just a bit of paper. You'll want some tokens or counters or something to denote players that have activated and some way of distinguishing whether they've used 1 activation or 2. This will cover you for the weight and the reaction mechanic. And finally, you might want some models to represent treasures or objectives which occasionally come up as a victory condition in a game. Now, to get the most out of your games, you'll also want some more scenery. Now, you can already buy the scenery separately from the Heart of Ghur box set. Or you can do the old-fashioned thing, like when we used to chuck green tablecloth down over a pile of books to make hills and grab anything you had to hand to play over. It's also worth bearing in mind that this content is all expected to be released separately in sort of February-March 2023 time, so an alternative way to get into the game right now might be just to buy 1 or 2 of the scenery boxes that are coming out separately, the core book and a warband of your choice. And then at a later date you may want to pick up one of these warband tomes if your warband happens to be featured in there. So if you're thinking, right, this is the box for me, I'm going to pick it up, or you already picked it up, then I would recommend your next purchase potentially being the Warcry core book. Now this is just if you're into the narrative side of things, but I do think this is where the game really shines. And it opens up a whole host of new content for you, including a bit more to do with that Stealth and Stone book. In addition to that, it does have all the cards printed in there that appeared in the Heart of Ghur box set, so this gives you loads more deployments, victory conditions, and twists to really vary your game to no end. So there we have it, that's Sundered Fate. I hope this video has been useful. If you do have any questions or anything I've covered or anything's unclear, please do feel free to leave a question in the comments. I will always get around to answering all of them. And yeah, thanks very much for watching. And I'll catch you all later in 2023. Take care.